Now go in peace, now go in peace, lay the love of God surround you everywhere, everywhere you may go. Go now in peace, lay the love of God surround you everywhere, everywhere you may go.
A little something from Walt Whitman. All the things of the universe are perfect miracles, each as profound as any. I will not make poems with reference to parts, but I will make leaves, poems, poemets, songs, says, thoughts with reference to ensemble. And I will not sing with reference to a day, but with reference to all days. And I will not make a poem, nor the least part of a poem, but has reference to the soul. Because, having looked at the objects of the universe, I find there is no one nor any particle of one, but has reference to the soul. Well, good morning again, and happy Independence Day holiday for everybody. It's a pleasure always to be back here this time of year. Lately, the cultural dialogue, when it's not been concerned with aging and ageism, has been very much concerned with judgment and justice. So that's been on my mind too. And I find in the realm which I swim of fairy and folk tales, there is a deep yearning that you can feel in most folk tales, a deep yearning for justice, a yearning well articulated by Dr. King when he said that the arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends towards justice. You can feel that yearning in a simple story like the story of the little ant, yearning for justice. And oftentimes that justice is expressed in extra-martial means, that is beyond the laws of the people, but somehow the natural world bends folktale justice, brings folktale justice. But sometimes the stories themselves demonstrate clever judgment and justice in a very satisfying way. And usually the justice is some form of consequence for injustice. For example, the story of the stingy baker, some of you may be familiar with, but a poor beggar who sits in front of a popular bake shop in the mornings, breathing in the heartwarming smell of the fresh bread that he cannot afford to buy, holds his cup out for alms, for charitable alms from the people passing through. And one day, the wealthy baker complains that this beggar is taking the smell of the bread without paying for it. Takes him to court before the judge, and the judge hears the argument and awards judgment to the baker. Asks the beggar to hold up his cup and let the baker hear the alms that are clinking in the cup. And so the poor beggar, thinking he's about to lose all his little bit of money, shakes the cup. And the judge says, "There, you're paid now for the smell of your bread with the sound of his money." There's a story from China, similarly, a poor young girl who sells fresh rice cakes at market that her grandmother makes every morning, steaming and greasy in a basket. And as she sells them, she tucks the coins that she receives for the sales in the basket underneath the cakes. And one day she sold all the cakes and is very happy at the bounty she's about to bring home when she stops to help a poor mother with her child, sets her basket down beside a stone. And when she comes back to the basket, finds that the coins are all gone. And so she puts up a cry, of course, upset, and all the people are gathered. And Everyone professes innocence, and so the judge determines that it must be the stone who has stolen the money, since the stone stands mute and will not speak to defend itself. And so he announces that by various arcane means he can ritualize, create a ritual that will bring a confession from the stone. But in order to do this, everyone must contribute a coin to the bowl of water that he holds. And as everyone in the marketplace does so, the baker, last of all, drops in a coin, and a film of oil covers the water, revealing that the baker's coin had been taken from the rice cake basket. It's fun, isn't it? Satisfying. The way folktales offer us a balm, a sense that serves this conviction that justice can be had, that crime will out, consequences will be meted out. I find it interesting in those two particular examples, and they're not uncommon examples, but in those two examples, that the criminal is the wealthy baker. And there's something about the in the folk mind, the danger of greed and the issue of appetite, which I find beautifully expressed in the baker. Rub-a-dub-dub, 3 men in a tub, the butcher, the baker, the candlestick maker. All the way as far back as Plato, and probably before, there's this idea of what's called the tripartite soul. Plato describes it as a charioteer who is trying to rein in 2 very powerful horses and keep them one direction. The 2 horses are appetite and power, and the charioteer is reason. We might think of them, I think of them as judgment, power or will, and appetite. And the 3 men in the tub is a good way for me to remember that. You see, you have the baker, appetite, the butcher, power, and the candlestick maker, light. And the 3 in the tub, maybe the quarrel about who's in charge. And that comes up also in various different folk tales. A myth from Greece about a king named Erysichthon, who was ambitious to build a great feasting hall and a long table for banqueting. He loved his parties and his pleasures, he loved his indulgences, and so in the forest he went searching for the wood to build his mansion, for the hard wood everlasting to fulfill this ambition. And the forest fell beneath him as he cut into the darkness, until at last he comes before the great oak tree. Sacred at the center, it is the numinous child of Demeter, goddess of the earth, who appears before Erysichthon, pleading that he turn away from harming and he stay his hand from cutting what was numinous and sacred. But Erysichthon, filled with lust for his desire, pushes past her and attacks the sacred oak tree. And as he cuts into that tree, red blood flows in the forest. And when at last he cut its center, that tree's falling scars the heavens. But he takes the sacred timber and he builds his feasting table, drinking deep and celebrating his great pride and great power. But the goddess, unforgiving, calls her sister to his chamber. Foul famine comes upon him to embrace him in his slumber, wraps her thighs about his belly, lick the salt off of his forehead, drawing sustenance out of him and replacing it with hunger. And then, ravenous with hunger, in the morning he runs screaming, calling for his servants to bring him food. And his servants work all hours, baking, boiling, broasting, roasting, toasting, blanching, frying, food of all kinds, bringing courses out of counting. Not a crumb escapes his notice. Any drink that falls beneath him, he kneels upon it with lapping, like more like a beast than something human. But soon his larder is depleted, and yet he suffers hunger with no ease and no abating, so he trades his possessions for more meat and grain to feed on. 100 head of cattle, 1,000 pecks and bushels gone as soon as they are gotten. Still he suffers hunger, and he studies how to treat it, how to have his cake and eat it. And he thinks about his daughter, the one loving and devoted, innocent and caring person that has left him. He sells her into slavery to furnish funds to feed his furnace. Yet soon it all is lost him, all his pride and power fallen, and he wanders as a beggar, eating filth amidst the ruins of the world he had exploited, while within his bestial hunger, like a mad wolf in the winter, gnaws him on the inside, howling in his belly, and in his madness, Erisichthon turns his greed upon himself, and to himself he feeds himself, until at last his life is ended. But his disembodied hunger whips around this pendant world, and if you walk the lifeless wasteland that was once the Goddess Valley, you may hear him whisper warnings that if we stand before the great tree, sacred at the center, yet we cut it and exploit it for our greed, we too will suffer soulless hunger that no temporal thing can feed. Appetite. Run amok. Erisichthon, Robert Graves' name, translates the name into earth terror, one who tears at the earth. Possibly it was originally a cautionary tale about planting against seasons, but you can see the relevance, I think, still today, these many thousands of years later. So this idea that there are these three forces, these three rub-a-dub-dub men in a tub. In the tub that represents the soul, if you will, and one might be thought of as judgment, one as power, one as appetite. That if they get into right relationship, you have an harmonious construction. You have judgment ruling over power, power maintaining its strength over appetite, the urgings of appetite. But if they are out of balance, there's trouble. And it's well expressed by Shakespeare in Troilus and Cressida, which is set in the Trojan War. And if you're familiar with the Iliad, there's a point at which Achilles and Agamemnon have split ways, and Agamemnon's refused to do anything. He's abdicated leadership, and Ulysses comes to admonish him and explains that all things have to be in right place, in degree, in order, and almost as if it was a Confucian idea that the king, let the king be the king, let the father be the father, and the mother, and the child, that we all have our place in the great harmony of life and the universe. And even though we live in an American culture that aspires to a classless society, we still live according to certain kinds of degrees. Think degrees in school, right? And think you have to have number one before you have number two. You have to have the undergraduate before the graduate, and so on. And there are certain ways in which we maintain order, driving on the right side of the road, for example. And Ulysses admonishes Agamemnon, cautioning him that take but degree away, and hark what discord follows. Each thing includes itself in mere repugnancy. The bounded waters should lift their bosoms higher than the shore and make a sop of all the globe. The rude son should strike his father dead. Strength would be lord of imbecility. Force would be right. or rather, right and wrong, between whose jar justice resides, would lose their names, and so should justice too. Then everything includes itself in power. Power into will. Will into appetite. And appetite and universal wolf, so doubly seconded with will and power, must perforce make an universal prey and last eat up himself. So in this times when justice and judgment seem to be at issue around us, I turn to hear the yearnings that are found in the fairy and the folk tales that we've inherited from our ancestors all around the world. And I have one in particular that comes to mind that involves appetite, for sure, and judgment as well, from Ethiopia, where Arha is slave to the wealthy merchant Haptum in the great market city of Addis Ababa, in the foothills of the Mount in Toto. Arha is responsible for gathering the firewood and the eucalyptus groves along the slope of the mountain to keep Haptum's feet warm in his cozy lounge. And on a cold winter night, Arha returns with a heavy load of wood upon his back and kneels beside the hearth and feeds the fire as Haptum sits back and enjoys the growing heat and the warming of his feet. And he says to Arha, "Is it cold out there tonight?" "Yes, master, bitter cold." "Ah, how lucky I am," says Haptum, "that I can sit here and enjoy the heat of this fire." I wonder, Arha, do you think a man might endure a cold night on the summit of Mountain Toto with weather like this? Arha, master, I do not know. Many things that we thought impossible have been proven possible, so it may be that there is nothing that a man cannot accomplish if he needs. That's what I'm thinking too, says Haptum. I'm wondering what would happen should a man be stripped naked and made to stand on the bare face of the mountain in the cold winter wind, without shelter, without food, without fire, like I have here. Could he endure such a long, harsh night? Arha, master, I cannot say. So often it seems that nothing is impossible. Yes, that's what I'm thinking too, says Haptum. I tell you what, Arha, if you would like, I will grant you your freedom, land, and cattle of your own. If you would try to stand upon the face of Mountain Toto naked, without shelter, food, or fire, and endure the night in this winter wind, how about it? Arha thinks. Freedom, land, cattle, the chance perhaps even to buy his father out of slavery. It is a deep yearning. Master, if it is your will, I will attempt as you wish. Let us shake on it, for I am a man of business, says Haptum. Give me your hand, and we will clasp hands together, and that will be our contract, that should you survive the night without food or fire, shelter or clothing upon the mountain's face, I will grant you your freedom, land, and cattle. And so it is. The plans are made that the very next night, Arha is to be left upon the mountain's face to endure the winter wind. He goes home to the slave quarters and explains it all to his father, what is about to happen, and wonders how on earth he will endure such a... But he offers his father hope. If I can, he says, perhaps there is a chance that we can become free. No, I cannot help you, said his father, except that I can keep vigil with you. As you stand upon the mountain, look out upon the flats of the valley below. Watch for my fire, for I will keep a watchfire all night as you stand there. Look for me as I watch for you. And so it is the next day. Servants of Hoptum take Arha to the mountain's cold stone face high on the summit, strip him naked, and then move down into the shoulder of the mountain and make themselves a nice and comfortable camp where they can keep watch on Arha as he stands there alone in the winter wind. And there stands the slave longing to be free, his bare feet cold against the cold stone, watching the sun go down, feeling the wind whip through his thin skin and chill him to the bone, feeling death luring him with its siren song of peace and oblivion, feeling as if at any moment he will give in and give up and fall, when, in the darkening gloom, he spies a pinpoint of light in the distant valley and knows it is his father there keeping watch for him. And he looks at that pinpoint of light, and then he sees another, thinking he's having double vision from the pain of the cold, but no, it is a separate fire. And then he sees yet another, until soon, all across the valley, there's a great constellation of watchfires, for not only his father, but all his community have come out to keep vigil for Arha. He watches those fires, knowing he is being watched. And it gives him strength to resist the lure of oblivion, the pain of the cold, until the morning light breaks, and he has endured. The servants bring Arha back to Hoptum, and they explain that they watched all night, and he endured, he survived, he has won the wager. Hoptum says, I am a man of business, and so, as I agreed, I will grant you your freedom, your land, and cattle. But tell me, Arha, how on earth was it possible for you to endure the night? I said, well, at first I thought it was not possible, and I almost gave up. But then I saw a distant light my father kept, and then other lights from watchfires from my community, far off in the valley. Little pinpoints of light, but it was enough to give me courage and strength. What? Said Hoptum. You mean you used fire, but the wager was no fire? No food, no fire, no shelter, no clothes. You have broken the wager, so you are once again my slave, and I will not award you the bounty as I had promised. But, Master, these were distant fires. They offered no warmth. Nevertheless, the wager was the wager and no fire. Now, this created quite a stir in the community, and as you can imagine, some people sided with Arha. And they were the slaves and servants and the serving class. And as you can understand, many of the community sided with Hoptum, and as you can imagine, they were the wealthy merchant class. And so it was all brought before the judge, and the judge, looking at the merchant class out there and knowing how many of them have taken him on expensive vacations, given him fancy gifts, helped to garnish his wages or improve on them, sided with Hoptum, and the merchants were all delighted that their form of justice had been upheld. Now, it just so happened that Nasruddin had been in Addis Ababa trading donkeys, which that's another story. Nasruddin was quite well known in the area. He was a very popular man for his quirky nature. And when Nasruddin heard about this judgment, and he heard about the situation between Hoptum and Arha, he said, such a clever merchant as Hoptum, who can show how well he can manage a bargain and how clever he can be even when he seems to be in a tight spot, he deserves celebration. I will put together a great banquet and invite all of the merchants to come, and we will celebrate the cleverness of Hoptum for how he was able to slip through this narrow crevice of law. And so everyone was excited. A great pavilion was raised and tables were laid with places for each of the guests, and all the merchant class came to sit at the long tables and get ready for the feast to celebrate Hoptum, who was seated in a place of honor, and their servants and their slaves waited outside, and in the nearby cooking tents, the sizzling and the chopping and the roaring of the cook fires and the smoke and the smell of that feast was enticing. And they all sat there at their places, mouths watering for the good food that was to come to them. And Nasruddin stood before them all and said, "We have gathered to celebrate the cleverness of our peer Hoptum. Look at how cleverly he showed the idiots of the serving class who are dull and not at all capable of ruling the world the way we can. Look at how cleverly he has maintained his station, and by so doing, our station as well. Let us give thanks to Hoptum." "Yes, everyone, yes, yes, yes. Enjoy the feast, my friends," said Nasruddin. "Yes, yes, yes, wonderful." They all cheered, they all cheered. Oh, the smell of the feast was just so enticing. But as they sat there, no food was being served. No drink was coming to their empty cups. It must not be ready yet. They waited a little longer until they became impatient, and they began to clamor, "Nasruddin, where is this food that you have promised us? This feast that we are all hungry for? We can smell it. It must be right out there. Let us eat." Nasruddin said, "I thought you would be happy with this feast that I've prepared for you. Can you not take sustenance from the smell of my feast? When Arha was able to take heat from a distant fire in the valley?" Then they all looked at Hoptum. You know, when you're faced with your peers and they are hungry on your account, their loyalty weakens. "Hoptum," they said, "maybe you want to reconsider this wager." He was shamed in public. Not by the serving class, it was not matter to him, but his peers, his own peers. And so he said, yeah, I guess it was not fair of me to break my word. I can see now that distant fires in the valley could not keep a man warm on the mountain. Arha has indeed succeeded where I thought and indeed hoped he might fail. Let him be a free man. Let it all be heard here and known that he will now have land and cattle. Arha, come and sit beside me as my peer, and we will discuss the terms of this wager and how we will make your life well as a free man. At that, Nasruddin called forth the feast, and the food was served to all in attendance. And Arha and Hoptum sat together, now as equals. Finally, Hoptum turned to Arha and said, "Now, you know, if it was not heat from those distant fires in the valley, how on earth were you ever able to survive that cold night?" And Arha thought about it. It was not heat from those fires, but hope from the light and the support of my community that held me up. Where justice fails, perhaps, love will abide. Give me once more, here I am. When judgment serves power, and power serves appetite, what justice can we hope for? One more story. But just an aside as well, the story of the little ant with which I spoke to earlier. I love stories like that. It's called, what kind of story we call a circle story or a chain story or a chain circle story. Cumulative tale. But stories like this, which abound in the folk tradition, and especially in early childhood, engender of change in perspective, hence the song From a Distance. Because from a distance, you begin to see how the little ant and the sun are connected, are related to one another. And if we can hold to that change of perspective, maybe we can get things back in right order. Here's a short story from China. Old Chen was set in his ways. No one could change that. No one could change his mind about how things should be and how things are. Chop wood, carry water, that's how he lived his life. That was his rule of thumb, if you will. One day he went out to chop wood, and he could not find his axe. It was his father's axe before him and his father's father before that, and it had been in the family, handed down from hand to hand. It was a precious item, important to him, and it was gone. Someone obviously had stolen it. He looked across the field at his neighbor's house, and there was his neighbor's sultry son sitting in the shade of a cooling tree on a hot day, whittling idly away on a stick. And Chen knew. That is the born thief. Look at that lazy child. His old father is only getting older. How can his father manage without the help of his son? And the son is just sitting there lazy, wasting time, not doing the hard work that needs doing. It's easy for someone like that to just come and take, not make. Look at the way his brow is so low and his eyes so close set and the way he hunches forward. He's a natural born thief. Well, he won't stay a thief any longer, for I will bring him justice. And so, righteously, Chen marched across the field to confront the slovenly neighbor's son. When he tripped over the axe that was fallen in the grass, where it was hidden from his view. And when he got up and saw that the axe was not stolen after all, but simply misplaced, he looked up again at his neighbor's son, who leapt from the shade as soon as his aging father stepped out the front door and ran to help his father down the stairs and offered him the stout walking stick he had just been carving. And then the young man helped his aged father on down the path where they went to market together, and Chen thought, what a fine young man. What an upstanding youth. What a credit to his father. How lucky am I to live next to such an honorable fellow. And then he had to reflect on himself. The boy had not changed. It was my way of seeing him that had changed. And when I was clinging to the love of my possessions, it blinded me to the love of my fellow man. From now on, let me look at others with charity and see in them their inherent worth and dignity, and know them to be innocent and worthy unless they demonstrate otherwise. And old Chen, as a result, became noted as a wise elder in his community and was often asked to solve and judge disputes. But how did he change his mind? Not because anyone else asked him to, but because he had the opportunity to see and change his perspective. Thank you, everyone. It's been a pleasure to listen.